I was saying, I have already shared this work of mine in the University of Leeds, but today I think it's a very good opportunity to discuss this work, this case study, under a different lens, and not only see an example of best practice in terms of the inclusion of Roma children, Roma pupils, and their community, but also in terms of present this in order to demonstrate the links of the relevance of language studies for research and pedagogy with underprivileged groups. So I will share a few details about the context that has to do with the Roma communities in Greece. And in fact, I'm using this picture. It's a screenshot from the state broadcaster here in Greece from the recent events due to COVID, where we can see the barrier lifted in a way that separates the Roma community. This is the specific Roma community we're talking about in Larissa in Greece. So there was a very localized outbreak in the community due to the conditions of living primarily. And so I'm using this to demonstrate that this on a symbolic level as well. So on the right hand side, we see the barrier, and on the left hand side, we have another symbolic barrier historically, that is the main road that in a way divides the area in two. On the right hand side, we have the Roma community. On the left hand side, we have the more the middle class dominant, ethnically dominant community. So Roma communities in Greece have a history of 700 years of settlement. And I would argue that they experience what Balibar calls a form of internal exclusion that has to do with the fact that on paper they are Greek citizens that therefore enjoy the rights of all Greek citizens share, the rights of formal citizenship. On the other hand, they find themselves excluded from key areas of public life. And research that has been undertaken with these communities shows that in order to tackle this kind of exclusion, their full emancipation in the public sphere is needed, which can happen primarily through discussions, conflict, and as this specific case study shows, interventions on a local level. So overall, what the Roma communities are characterized in Greece and elsewhere is the experience of non-acceptance by the state that essentially links to this perpetuation of exclusion from the dominant communities and the political life. Reflecting a little bit on the relevance of my work with, I would say, the scope of the Center for Language Education, I found that the most important link is in the concept of authoritative discourse that underpins the broader research, because this case study is part of my doctoral research. And what has been defined as authoritative discourse by Bakhtin is this authoritative that comes from the past, demands that we acknowledge it and we embrace it. Further to this, I tried to, in the context of my thesis, I tried to see the implications of this theory, of this approach for the sociology of education, and specifically with the works of Basil Bernstein, Michel Foucault, and Pierre Bourdieu, who argue that discourses are a form of of symbolic power and symbolic control, and the practices that that comprise these discourses and concern daily life in this case are considered indisputable, and they're part of the long tradition in the educational system. So the empirical basis of the observation is the observation of these rituals, of these practices that constitute rituals and lead to the ritualization of everyday life. So the emphasis of my observation has been on the hidden curriculum as well as the official curriculum, and as it has been observed in public schools of the sample, including this one, the democratic procedure and the so-called contractual character of the observance of the rules have given their place to the logic of the predominance of the dominant mentality. So with that said, one of the main questions that I rose in the context of my research is what happens when the dominant mentality is what one of the most eminent sociologists in Greece, sociologists of education in Greece say. So what happens when this mentality is the fact that the rules have a non-binding nature, and the fact that children are educated in a society in which rules do not always and exactly apply to anyone, governing and governed. So that means that this may have severe implications if the rule of law is not always respected. It can have severe implications for underprivileged groups. So with this in mind, I draw on the Charter on Education for Democratic Citizenship and Human Rights Education, and specifically its focus on democratic governance that is understood as a practical means of learning and experiencing democracy and human rights in school contexts. When it comes to democratic governance, what this case study has shown is that it becomes an issue of social justice. The fact that these groups experience a vicious circle of exclusion and disadvantage, and the unfortunate coincidence, the unfortunate event of interventions from across the stakeholder spectrum not actually having impact at scale. And I would argue that this inefficiency at scale is what would be the main question of this case study. So when it comes to the school, it's a primary school in an urban area in Greece. The student population is 60% Roma pupils. At the time of the observation, it was operating on interchangeable shifts. Not many people from the UK context primarily are familiar with it. So two schools may be sharing the same building and so on. So the interchangeable shifts, some people attending in the mornings and the other school in the afternoon is what happens with very severe implications as well for school life. And the school was situated at the next to the Roma settlement, characterized also by the lack of resources. In this context, the leadership, the impact of leadership was very, very, it was catalyzing, I would argue. And it was primarily a one-person effort, the one person that was inspiring the rest of the stakeholders in the by himself and inspiring other teachers. he was constantly engaging with other stakeholders, and it's very, very, I would say it was very distinct, the fact that the school, unlike most schools in Greece, was very open to the academic community and research. And what was most distinct about this particular case is the personal involvement of the teacher in the community, embracing their customs, practices, forming relationship, becoming the godfather of children, and so on. So very, very briefly, I cannot go into the details of the practice. I hope I have sketched out the approach. The impact that we have seen is the increased number of registrations of Roma pupils, their consistent participation, unlike truancy phenomena that we have concerning Roma communities, and also their participation to secondary education. When it comes to the broader community, we witnessed the participation to actions organized by the school. Their involvement, reduced damages to the building was another element on a symbolic level that demonstrated some extent of efficiency of the practice. And when it comes to teachers, they have developed an expertise of teaching Roma under these circumstances, something that is primarily due to their personal commitment and personal investment in the process, also inspired by the head teacher. And when it comes to the non-Roma stakeholders, we have witnessed the pupils coexisting under terms of toleration with the Roma pupils, forming both mixed and non-mixed groups. And the non-Roma parents, on the other hand, have been significantly, have remained significantly distanced and less engaged, although more accepting. So I will close with the legacy of this approach. What happened, this kind of openness to sources of funding, openness to the academic community and so on, led to targeted funding and the achievement of the school community in establishing, in having a new building funded by the European Union, avoiding the interchangeable shifts status, and also on a symbolic level again, built in the mainstream part of the neighborhood. So I would argue that this form of governance, this form of leadership, managed in the end to put the school in the map of the mainstream community.
Yes. I think that Ioanna's work is very interesting because give the picture, a total picture. Sorry for my English, I'm not like you. I have very limited competence, like Roma people in Greek school. I told Ioanna that also it's very interesting because her work give the pedagogical, the real pedagogical situation now in, and actually in the paper or in his dissertation, her dissertation take many parameters, let's say just parameters to family, because it's a network. All the things, it's a frame, a play. We can approach the subject of Roma education based only in the school. No, it's very complicated, a network of parameters, and we are working, we are as a team, Haroula Stathopoulou, Christos Govaris, we are a team, and actually there are many other colleagues in Greece who are facing, we are facing all this problem, and we are trying many practices, you know, across the years, because for me, my first experience with Roma starts 10 to 15 years ago. So we try many to understand, from languages to pedagogical stuff, to how to deal with in school, of course, always in school. And it's a big, very complicated issue arised from this situation. And Roma have a community as which I don't remember exactly. Ioanna, you mentioned about the numbers of Roma in Greece. Many communities, many difference between communities. It's not easy to speak about only Roma. I like that Ioanna speak about Roma in this community, because we have many differences, even in the biggest area like Thessaly, with 4 cities, small urban centers. We have many differences about Roma communities in these 4 urban centers. This is for the moment.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lena. So I think we will be interested in some of your work on students' linguistic repertoires and how you've been working in this particular area, bringing Roma pupils' linguistic and semiotic repertoires into.
We can share some paper in English because we write in Greek. It's not easy, but I think that we have some works in English we can share with us.
Yeah, so that will be of huge interest. Thank you so much, Lena. Okay, so now over to Danny, if that's okay with you, Danny. And we will hear a very different perspective now, but very much in relation to language and inclusive societies, but slightly different perspective here. So Danny, help us to reflect on this broader question from your research perspective. Yeah, ready?
All right, thank you, Margaret. My research is on is becoming increasingly common in higher education in Ghana that deaf students learn in the same classroom with
Danny, I think we can't hear you very well. Maybe you can you come closer to your microphone, or
is it okay now, please?
Perfect. Yeah, great.
All right. So my work is based in Ghana in tertiary classrooms where sign language interpreting mediates inclusive practices. And as I said before, it is becoming increasingly common in Ghana in higher institutions that deaf students learn in the same classrooms with hearing students. And my usage of deaf people means people who learn through sign language interpreting. And though this is becoming common, the understanding that people even have regarding the practice is not known. So my research is, focused on establishing the sort of understanding that these actors involve. What I mean by the actors are the lecturers who teach the deaf students in the classrooms, the sign language interpreters, the deaf students themselves, and the context within which they find themselves. Mostly, I represent that with the heads of institutions who have deaf students in their department. So I examined the understanding of inclusion, and also, as they have this kind of understanding, what are the various demands that it has on sign language interpreters who sort of interpret the classroom interactions for deaf students and their lecturers. And then the final stage of it was to, have a video of the classroom interaction to analyze the enactment of inclusion in the classroom. And I think it's the finding is getting similar to what has been spoken of earlier, when in the Roma and the Greece context, it's been advocated for democratic governance as a pedagogic approach. What is emerging in my study is that in the classroom context, when we have lecturers, deaf students, and interpreters all playing a critical role, all collaborating, working together, you see that there are some level of successes that is emerging out of that. And I am arguing for collaboration in such context. And I'm likening it to what has been discussed, that it's more or less like democracy. Everyone bring their part, and we allow people also to express themselves. So if we allow, these actors to contribute to the interaction in the classroom, providing the necessary support, then we could set up what an effective inclusion should be. So trying to let people know that though it sounds confusing to define inclusion in the context, but in a given situation, in a given time, all the actors involved must be ready to collaborate. That is going to help achieve the goals of inclusion. So I think that's the relationship that I draw from these two studies.
Thank you, Danny. So we've got an interesting picture here about how all different stakeholders, like Lena was saying earlier, there are many dimensions to it. It's not just the school, many dimensions, but even within the school, as Ioanna, you have shown us, it really takes the community and that head teacher who kind of drives that agenda. But Danny is also talking about that collaboration and collaborative efforts. And maybe we will hear more about that from Loreto, because I know, Loreto, that you've been doing work that very much is related to this question. So Loreto, over to you, and we want to hear from your perspective now.
Thank you. I saw a lot of overlap with Ioanna's work in relation to what I did in my PhD. I worked in a context which was implementing a curriculum change, trying to, with basically with a pretended, well, they intended to do a bottom-up change, but it was pretty much a top-down change. And I think that actually connects pretty much with what she discussed in the paper. One of the features that I think overlaps a lot with what I did in my PhD is the leadership, and the importance of the leadership in conducting curriculum change, or change in any case. I mean, what Ioanna describes in her work is a process of change. The leadership that the head teacher, that the one that he does in this work is fascinating. He has a really challenging role, and he's really committed to it. So he actually covers layers, visible and invisible layers of change within the community. So he's a school community, but also beyond the community. So when you talk about the area, in this context, the involvement of the head teacher with the teachers as well, that are actually implementing the change in the classroom. So involving all these drivers of change are really interesting. And the role of the teachers, as they are the frontline workers, so basically the ones that are actually working with the children, they also go with processes of change, the changes that they face in their professional lives, the changes that they need to go through with their own beliefs, and learning these new classroom routines, these new behaviors, not only inside the classroom, but also within the school community and beyond, which usually implies going the call of duty. So these are teachers that are really, really committed to that change. And so basically what I see with this head teacher and in this particular community is the changes that the head teacher is doing to the organizational community, which is benefiting not only that particular school, but the community itself, and is creating social cohesion. I wonder, and particularly looking into these baby steps, into the small gains when we know that change can take years, that there have been baby steps for change, and there have been little, there have been achievements as creating this accepting children, and accepting is a first step for inclusion, and that non-Roma parents have become more accepting, which is baby steps again. But I wonder what the sustainability of this project is over time. What happens with this particular, as this has been what I see, or what I understood, is that this is a one-man change project. So what happens when the head teacher leaves? What happens when, if there are other people that are actually having the same, have understood the what this head teacher wants to do, and if others, once this head teacher steps down, will be able to carry on the work that has been implemented for a period of time, and can take forward the change when this person leaves. And that's sometimes what happens in curriculum change, or change in general, what sometimes you fail. So when it's actually, and we can see it in different contexts, when understand change as a national commitment rather than a political one. So it doesn't really depend on who is leading it, but it actually needs to be able to embed and permeate all the layers, visible and invisible ones, in order to be able to be sustainable over time. So it's beyond being a person, but actually it can be sustained over time. That's my reflection on this.
Thank you, Loreto. And I wonder, so there are some really very specific questions there. And I wonder, I mean, this is not, don't feel obliged, but Ioanna, do you want to respond to any of those? And also other comments so far before we ask Ruth to come in?
Absolutely. I have said to Loreto, we had a small chat yesterday, and I would say that this question around the sustainability of the effort is spot on. And I'm going to give my reflection, and I would argue that Lena and Hara would be in a better position to respond to that, because they continue doing research with these groups, they continue being in the area and so on. So my first thought is that this kind of, let's say, one-man show, very simplistically, is very, very important. This kind of personal involvement of this one person and this intervention on the very local level is hugely important, specifically and particularly when it comes to the Roma populations.
I think we're doing very difficult research. I think researching social justice is hugely problematic, and I find it very difficult to do and difficult to read about as well, the way it's done in some cases. So the way that I suppose I'm going about it is to think about education and what we can do, and also to be critical. And I think that what's come out here is, and everyone's different views on this, shows how important it is to be critical of what we think inclusion is and what it's for, and how we arrive there somehow, and what we build those understandings on. And you've said this before, and this is one of your themes, Maggie. In my work particularly, language is everything. So the enactment of inclusion, whatever that is, rests on language and communication, if you're working in the field that I'm working in. And Danny's touching on that in his thesis, because you can't be included in tertiary if you don't have an accessible language environment. But before that, and this is the thing that I'm really grappling with and is difficult to write about in the context of deaf studies and deaf education, is there is, as well as the social constructs around inclusion, there are the biological, organic issues around being a deaf child and growing up in a hearing world, which obviously I'm not, but growing up without hearing commentary around you, growing up with a late entry to literacy, with perhaps a delayed access to language, growing up where you may not be in an accessible language environment from zero. So all the things that that brings with it in terms of your experience as a deaf individual. And so I can't see any way that, and often in my field, people separate a medical and a social. I cannot see any way that we can, because one underlines the other. Deafness is an organic issue, if you like, a biological issue, but that leads to a completely different social set of experiences and understandings. So the way that I work is trying to bring those together and show that they're both authentic perspectives, which isn't always that popular. And then I think the thing that we have to think about in that case is, what is inclusion? Is it putting them in the same school? Actually, if it's about me as a deaf person having an accessible language environment, yeah, that may well be that inclusion is you understanding the need for deaf spaces. I'm just like using me because it's easier today. And the deaf spaces need to exist for children to continue to learn, to sign together, to have a peer group, to have social relationships, to fill in that everything that goes missing when you're in a world that's hearing and the commentary around you is hearing. We've seen this around COVID-19. Missing out, yeah, I get the briefing, but I don't, all the discussion around the briefing, it's not reaching deaf people. This is the work we've been doing in Ghana with Danny. So I suppose I would say language is absolutely nailed at the centre. And around that, we need to look at all of those levels, from the individual, the bio, the ecological, and the constructs around individuals and around cultures, in order to make a decision about what we think is inclusive and isn't. And as Loretta says, how to make that a sustainable situation that they